Hello and welcome to Solosaurus, a podcast about one-player board and card games. My name is Brandon Waite.
My name is Carter Mackey.
And this is episode number 4, where we're going to be talking about Mansions of Madness from Fantasy Flight Games, which is sort of like House Hunters, but with, more tentacles and existential dread. And like the show, your characters have absolutely no discernible source of income, but still feel like a mansion is in their future. So we're going to get to that game in just a little bit, but first, we're going to get to the news. Osprey Games has announced an expansion for the Lost Expedition called The Fountain of Youth and Other Adventures. Carter, have you ever seen anything about the Lost Expedition before?
I have not.
Man, it is this really neat-looking little exploration-style card game that has artwork that looks like The Adventures of Tintin. Do you know what I'm talking about? Kind of a...
Maybe?
Maybe. Well, it's a really interesting cartoony style of art. It looks beautiful on the table. I haven't played this one yet, but a lot of people are really giving it some love in the Facebook solo groups. This new expansion is going to add 4 new modules to the game. Beyond that, we're not really sure what's a part of this. Obviously, the Fountain of Youth is involved in some way. And some of the pictures that Osprey Games have put up, there are pictures of skeletons searching for the explorers, and the explorers are hiding from them. So there's also skeleton bros. That's all we really know. 4 new modules, comes out September 18th, 2018. So keep your eye out for that one. Quinid Games or Quinid Games, or I don't know how to pronounce it. Whatever it is, they've announced Carson City, the card game.
Did you ever actually play the first Carson City?
I've never played Carson City. Have you?
No, I haven't.
It looks amazing. If you're not familiar with Carson City, it's a big box worker placement game, but set in the Old West instead of in, medieval Europe with the dour-faced counts and that sort of thing. And as I understand it, if you go to a worker placement spot with somebody else, you can duel them.
Yeah.
Yeah, which definitely needs to be a thing that's in more Euro games.
Yeah, they wouldn't be so dry.
Yeah, there were duels in medieval Europe, right?
Yeah, for ladies.
Oh yeah, duels for ladies. Mm-hmm. All right, this one though, this card game is going to be a little bit different than the base game. It's a 1 to 6 player trick-taking game. Okay. So I'm not sure what relationship that has to the base game. Maybe it's just trying to be a sort of a cash grab based on the Carson City name.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not sure. But also what's interesting to me is that a solo trick-taking game could even be a thing.
Yeah, I can't really visualize how that would work.
I can't either, but I really want to try it.
Right.
So look for that one in the future. I'm going to try to cover that one on the show at some point. The third announcement we've got for you today is that CMON Limited has announced Zombicide Invader. I'm mentioning this because a lot of solo players seem to really enjoy Zombicide. I've never actually played it.
Okay, I was about to ask, because you say that with almost, like, other people enjoy it, but I don't.
Oh, no, it's not an elitist thing, I promise. I've just never had a chance to. I always thought the Zombicide franchise looked cool. At this point, it's a little bit overwhelming for me to figure out a good entry point.
Right, yeah.
But as I understand it, this is like a new core set. So there was the normal Zombicide set in the modern day. Then there was Zombicide Black Plague, which was set in medieval times. And now this one is set in space. And right. I want to say here, I think that the Zombicide series might have officially jumped the shark, because there's not actually zombies involved in this, as far as we can tell.
Oh, right, good.
Yeah. So they're just humans on another planet, maybe greedily looking for ore or something, and they run into aliens who want to kill them. So, the title now officially means nothing, but if you're interested in that, check out CMON Limited's page. They're going to start doling out information on that game over the next few weeks as they prepare for what I'm sure will be a huge Kickstarter. So keep your eye out. The fourth thing here is Upper Deck has announced the next big box expansion for Marvel Legendary, World War Hulk. Carter, have you played Marvel Legendary yet?
Still haven't, but I hear you talk about it all the time.
Yeah, sorry. I don't actually invite other people to play that game with me because it's so much better one player, in my opinion. And I'm not alone in that. Marvel Legendary is a game that has gotten a lot of love on Board Game Geek from the solo community. There's actually somebody who runs online tournaments of this game pretty regularly on BGG. Okay. They do seasons where you can post your score for a game with a particular set of parameters and compete against other people. So definitely something worth checking out. It's going to follow the World War Hulk and Planet Hulk storylines. 400 card set, and it's getting a June 2018 release date. So,
how many of these are there? Like expansions?
How many expansions for Marvel Legendary?
Yeah, it's like 1,000, right?
Yeah, I've got like 6 of them.
Okay.
I think they just came out with a new small box expansion called Champions that has Miss Marvel and the new Hulk and Gwenpool and a few characters like that. That just adds new characters. But these big box expansions, maybe there have been 4 or 5 of them at this point, they just add so much content.
Yeah.
At this point, if you have all the expansions, there is absolutely no chance you're playing the same game twice unless you just set out to.
Right.
So, pretty cool that that's coming from Upper Deck. Keep your eye out for that. Also, NSKN is going to be kickstarting a deluxe edition of Tony Boydell's famous game, Snowdonia. Do you know anything about Snowdonia?
Nope.
Snowdonia is like a train game, as I understand. It's a worker placement Euro about building train tracks or something. It shows a lot of European-looking guys sort of lounging about smoking pipes while there's coal being transferred and carts and stuff in the background.
Okay.
You know, pretty standard train Euro fare.
Yeah.
But this is interesting news to me because this is a game that's gotten a lot of love from the solo community for a long time. And earlier this year, it was announced that this game is going to be reworked, basically, into a new game called A Nice Cup of Tea. Okay. And now, for whatever reason, they're also kickstarting a new version of Snowdonia. So there are essentially 2 versions of this game coming out this year.
What is A Nice Cup of Tea themed differently?
Yeah, it's themed around running a tea plantation, I think.
Okay.
Or something like that. So, pretty interesting news. You might want to just take a look at which one interests you most and try to find a way to get your hands on it. I know I'm going to because this has a reputation of being a great solo Euro experience. All right, and then probably the biggest news this week, WizKids has announced Mage Knight Ultimate Edition. Mage Knight is one of those games that pretty consistently is at the top of every solo board game list. We just talked about that a couple of weeks ago. You've not played this one, right?
Not solo. I've played it with other people.
That's right.
I think twice.
Yeah, it's definitely better when you're not waiting on other people to finish their turns.
Right. Yeah, things can get a little drawn out.
They can. This new edition is going to include all of the expansions, so the big box Lost Legion expansion, as well as the 2 smaller box ones, the Krang expansion, which adds an extra character, and the Shades of Tesla expansion, which adds a new character and a few new game modes. This new edition is going to come out in September of this year. It's going to cost $125, which sounds like a lot, but actually isn't too bad considering that it comes with all of these expansions already in the box.
Isn't Mage Knight a little pricey, just the base set?
I think the base set, when I got it, was about $60.
Okay, not as bad as I thought.
Yeah, and the Lost Legion expansion is a big box expansion.
Yeah.
So I think it seems like a fair price to me. It's also going to include 5 new cards in the game and then minis with alternate paint jobs.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I think one of the key questions for a lot of people is going to be, will there be an upgrade kit for this game? You know, because I already have all the expansions. And apart from wanting a square box, which is what the new edition comes in.
Right.
Which is super tempting, just not $125 tempting.
Right.
Apart from that, you know, I'm not going to pay a lot of money for 5 new cards and some alternate paint jobs. But according to the publisher, the rules text for this new edition will be available online. I think it's going to be like a slimmed down, comprehensive set of rules. So that'll be nice. Everybody can just download that. And the rest of the new stuff might be available for sale a year or more from now, but even that's not for sure. So unless you're willing to shell out $125, you may or may not be able to get this content down the road. That's what we've got. That's the news for this week, which means we're going to head into our review of the week for Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition from Fantasy Flight Games. Carter, do you want to tell us a little bit about what Mansions of Madness is?
It follows standard, I guess, Lovecraftian game fares, at least from what I've experienced. I guess the only Lovecraft games I've played are Eldritch Horror and Arkham Horror. You choose investigators from a large group, and it's a cooperative game where you are, I guess, fending off grotesque monstrosities, cultists, trying to unravel some kind of conspiracy or plot and do all of this before you get overwhelmed, either physically or just mentally, and lose your mind and go insane in some way.
Yeah, that's a pretty good description. And this new edition that came out from Fantasy Flight Games last year, I believe, sometime in early 2017, late 2016, somewhere around there. This new edition is an attempt to try to streamline a lot of that clunkiness out of the original edition of the game. And one of the ways they decided to do that was to introduce pretty major app integration.
I mean, I feel like that's one of the most notable parts of it, is how the app interacts with the gameplay in general and how it kind of paces and takes care of a lot of housekeeping.
Yeah, I've never actually played a game quite like this.
Right. And I would say, well, yeah, I haven't played a lot of, I guess, the more popular games that have app integration. What was it, the one with like Alchemy or something?
Yeah, Alchemist has one.
Right. And then XCOM. And the way they had app integration didn't seem bad, but it just wasn't like necessarily a compelling feature on its own, where this is the first time I've seen how an app is integrated with a board game. And it really makes a lot of sense, and it makes me see where a lot of the potential is going to be in integrating, still having the tactile satisfaction of playing a board game while having an app handle a lot of the behind the scenes stuff or just kind of fiddly bits that you just don't really need to deal with.
Yeah, and we should say here, this does require an app to play. It's a free app. I mean, I guess free if you don't count that you're paying like $90 for the game if you buy it somewhere.
Right.
But the box does have a nice set of really well-illustrated room tiles. It has some dice, has monster figures, has investigator miniatures. So you're actually laying out a board as you play. You're exploring new rooms and adding new tiles to this mansion or town or wherever you happen to be in a particular scenario. And you're moving your figures around a physical board, but there's an app off to the side here that's playing some sort of atmospheric music. It's allowing you to interact with characters without having to pull cards, for instance, to tell you what a character's saying. It allows you to look at one room at a time. You know, you don't have to look in a scenario book to tell you what a giant map layout is going to look like. When you explore a new room, this app generates for you a picture of what the room tile looks like, so you can find it in your stack of tiles.
Also, encounter cards that would be common from like Arkham and Eldritch Horror. Instead of having a deck of cards that you're going through to find out how an encounter resolves, you click that you're going to do something, and then it generates a random encounter, either for the Mythos phase, if you're familiar with some of the other games, and just combat encounters or things like that.
And so it's essential to play the game. You can't play this game without the app.
Right. Those cards do not exist physically.
Right. But I promise you that once you play it with the app, you're not going to be able to imagine this game working well without it.
Right.
That's how the game actually functions. Before we get a little bit more into gameplay, we want to talk first for a few minutes about components.
Yeah, very, very top notch. What I expect from Fantasy Flight at this point.
Yeah, the artwork is fantastic. Especially the tiles themselves, they're made from really thick, sturdy cardboard with a nice linen finish on them. And the room artwork is just beautiful.
Yeah, done really well. They don't look plain. They have like little details and stuff on the side of like, you know, the rooms or furniture, like trash cans that are overturned in streets, things like that.
And I would also say the same thing about the cards. The game comes with plenty of cards. The graphic design on them is very well done. Everything is clean, but also has this brooding, heavy horror atmosphere to it.
Right.
Right down to, of course, the text and the stories on the cards certainly feel that way, but all the artwork does. If I had any complaint about the artwork in this game, is that a lot of it was lifted right out of Eldritch Horror.
Yeah, I would say almost the vast majority of the cards exist in Eldritch Horror.
They do. And the artwork was great in Eldritch Horror.
Right.
So it's not a huge complaint, but I would say I do also have Eldritch Horror and love it. And Carter does as well.
Yeah.
And so we were just quick to notice that a lot of the artwork is the same between the two. They share a lot of the same art assets.
It almost threw me off a little bit just in that some of the spells or items work a little bit differently than in the previous game. And just like my memory would go back to how they operated in that game. But I mean, it was a minor thing. It wasn't like a problem. Yeah,
they are two very different games. When I say two, I mean I'm lumping Arkham Horror and Eldritch Horror together here. And Mansions of Madness. Mansions of Madness definitely feels like a more intimate experience, like a zoomed in experience.
Yes.
But yeah, there's definitely a very similar feel across them, and that does make it confusing when a particular skill doesn't work the same as it did in the other game. As far as the miniatures in the game are concerned, the investigator miniatures I think are fine. They're not the fanciest, most detailed miniatures ever. And I don't paint or anything, so I'm not a miniatures expert.
Yeah.
But they look good enough, right?
Yeah, they're good. I mean, if you're like really into miniatures, maybe they're not the most amazing, mind-blowing thing ever, but I mean, they're good miniatures still.
Yeah, they're fine, I would say. The monster miniatures I'm less enthusiastic about. Some of them have some pretty cool detail and look nice. Others are a little blurry looking. I don't know, or maybe muddy looking is the right way to say.
Right, especially I feel like the smaller monsters.
Yes, for sure. And the biggest complaint I have about the components in this game, by a mile, is the way that the miniatures work in this game is they each have little pegs, I guess, on the bottom of their feet. And the idea is you take these miniatures and you are supposed to be able to socket them into these plastic square bases. And that allows them to stand upright and be a little more stable. And also you can slide a tile into the square base underneath the monster's feet that shows the monster's stats. So you have all the benefits of having a monster miniature and also having a tile that actually has, a monster's health or strength or whatever else printed on it. It's a pretty cool system in theory. According to the game book, you're supposed to be able to just plug these miniatures right into their square bases and slide in the tiles and you're good to go. I'm here to tell you right now, it does not work that way. You have to use glue to get these things to stay on their stands.
Yeah, they will not stand on their own.
Absolutely not. It was one of the most maddening experiences I've ever had trying to get these little pegs situated into the holes because they don't fit exactly right.
Yeah.
And then trying to put on the glue on each foot on every miniature in the game to get it nailed down. I mean, I guess if you're a miniature gamer, this probably doesn't matter to you really at all because you're used to assembling stuff.
Right.
I'm a spoiled hobby board gamer and I'm used to miniatures that come pre-assembled. I'm used to not having to buy glue. I really hated this part of the components.
Yeah. I mean, I played this game, just borrowed your copy, so I didn't get to have the same experience. But I did think when we played together, there were still a couple of minis you hadn't assembled yet, and they were falling out constantly.
Oh, yeah. Yes, for sure. And, once they're all assembled and glued down, it's fine. I've not really had any trouble out of them since then. They're definitely a little difficult to store in the box in any kind of organized or, protective way. I've just decided I'm not going to care about that. But they're fine otherwise once you get them assembled. It's just that upfront experience is going to be probably very frustrating.
Well, one other thing about dice.
Yeah.
I just want to say, compared to the other games, it's very satisfying rolling a bunch of D8s.
Oh, yeah. The dice in this game are D8s and not D6s.
Right. And it's not a number system. It's just like a success or like a blank side, basically.
Yeah. The dice are really nice engraved dice like you would expect from Fantasy Flight. And bonus, this is one of the few games from Fantasy Flight where I think they give you enough dice in the box to roll the maximum attack you're going to roll. So basically, in other Fantasy Flight games, they'll give you 3 or 4 attack dice, and you'll frequently have attacks that need to roll 6 dice.
Right.
So they are very conveniently willing to sell you dice packs so that you can have enough dice to actually roll your full attack.
How kind of them.
Yes, so kind. Well, thankfully in this game, they did actually give you enough in the box. You don't have enough for a set for every player, but
it covers almost all situations. I didn't have to re-roll any dice at any point.
I didn't either.
There might be some fringe cases where you would have to, but
yeah, but I didn't run into anything like that. So overall, yeah, the components are really good quality. Exactly what you would come to expect from Fantasy Flight, minus my concerns about the miniatures.
Right.
As far as the rules are concerned, the rulebook structure follows a similar pattern to what other Fantasy Flight games have been doing recently, where there's a learn how to play book and then a rules reference book in there as well.
Yeah, I really like that style of play. It makes it very simple to get into the game and not be completely drowned in all the rules that could be there.
Definitely.
But also having something alphabetized that makes lookup really easy when you do inevitably need to look up rules.
Definitely. And I would also say, too, that one of the benefits of having an app as part of this game is it feels to me like there are fewer rules than normal because the app is handling so many things for you.
Yeah, it's true. I didn't really think about that, but yeah.
Yeah, because in this game, there is an investigator phase where you take your turns, And then there's a mythos phase where the game kind of fights back against you. And normally there's a section in the rule book, in Eldritch Horror Arkham that covers how the mythos phase works. I mean, it's barely covered in this book because the app does all of that stuff for you.
Right, which is very nice.
Oh man, it's so nice. So the rules are well done, definitely, and it's very easy to look up something in the reference guide. I mean, it's not a gateway game, right? So there are a decent amount of rules, but certainly not overwhelming. And that leads us to the actual play of the game. The idea of this game is that you are a group of investigators going to some location and trying to solve a mystery. And my thing about games like this is that normally if there is a mystery as part of the gameplay experience, it doesn't actually feel like you end up trying to solve a mystery. It feels like you just go to a place and fight a bunch of monsters until you win.
Right, and you're just like ticking off, okay, I found clues,
right,
or I've invested these clues that I've found into solving this mystery.
But collecting clues ends up feeling like collecting, wood or sheep.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what the resource is. It's just another resource.
Right.
But in this game, it doesn't feel like that at all to me. Does that feel that way to you?
Right. The fact that they have actual cards that are like designating pieces of evidence,
right,
and that you can check to see how much you've discovered of the mystery.
Yeah, you can check to see how much of the mystery you've uncovered. You are slowly going room to room, exploring whatever location you're in. And as you go through these rooms, sometimes you'll see a stack of papers on a desk. And you can choose to interact with those papers and read them. And that might lead to a piece of evidence, for instance. Or you might interact with a person in the world and have a conversation with them. And if you make the right conversational choices, maybe that will lead to some more evidence about this case. And over time, you collect a few pieces, like cards that say, circumstantial evidence or incriminating evidence. The more of these you collect, the more you're getting close to the end of the scenario. So there are monsters that you fight in this game. You do move around a map just like you would in Descent or any other kind of dungeon crawl style game. And you do fight monsters by rolling dice, that sort of thing. But it definitely felt to me like you really are trying to solve a mystery.
Yeah, I guess the way that it would be like, oh, you can't open this door because it has a lock, or someone's asking you for a password. And that's something that maybe you could take a more brute force approach to some of those problems, or you could possibly find something somewhere else in the map and you kind of decide how you're going to handle that.
And the way that you interact with the map, to me, is one of the best parts about this game. Because on your turn, you have pretty standard actions like move to another space or fight a creature that's in your space, something like that. All the stuff you would expect. Interact with something that's in your space. And the way that it works in this game is you do actually move your figure around the board, but on different spaces where you have someone that you can interact with or fight, there's a tile on the board there that you can see a representation of that thing, or a monster figure if it's a monster. And on your computer screen or your phone screen, you can actually see a representation of it as well. So you walk up to that thing and you click the icon in the app and it will tell you your options for interacting. So it makes that whole process seem so smooth and unobtrusive that for me, getting some of that stuff out of the way that would normally be handled by cards or charts or whatever, that's what made me feel like I was actually trying to solve a mystery.
Yeah, and I feel like also, even before you take an action with saying like investigating some papers, there's like a little short, like 1-sentence description about what would kind of entail with that action. And I feel like there were times that it'd be like, okay, well, I'll do this. And then when I read that description, I'm like, okay, this wasn't quite what I thought it was. And so it just like gives you a little bit more of a sense, I feel like sometimes, of what you would be spending your action on. And so you might do something else, or at least that's what I did several times.
Yeah, I agree. And it ends up making you, not only is it kind of a preview of what's to come, but it also, for me, takes some of the mechanical feel out of it. I mean, you are certainly managing an economy of actions.
Yeah, there's definitely that narrative sense that you're looking and investigating through.
Yeah, everything in this game is so thematically grounded.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And so that app really enhances the gameplay, especially when it comes to the exploration and fighting side of things. Because when you come to a new room, for instance, you'll see here are some doorways that go off of this room into other parts of the mansion or out into the street or the town. And you can't see what's coming up ahead. And so if you want to explore, you need to tap a little icon on your computer screen and it will say, okay, here's the room that's in front of you now. And it'll give you a little flavor text about what you see in the room. In this corner, there's a stack of papers.
Right.
And here, there's some old relics that looks like they were, I don't know, stolen from some cursed tribe in the rainforest or something.
Yeah.
Standard Lovecraftian fare.
Yeah.
And there's this narrative that unfolds through your exploration that leads to kind of an emerging story. There's a story that happens in the game, that the script that the game has to follow. But because it's woven so tightly with the actual mechanics of the game, it feels like there's an emergent narrative that happens here in a way that doesn't happen in other games for me.
Yeah, I mean, that would happen sometimes with Eldritch Horror, but it was definitely more limited to, I feel like, maybe moments or just like really specific games, where it feels like, I feel like it's kind of always present, and I feel like it's its own kind of like storyline.
Yeah, it's its own storyline with lots of little tiny climaxes along the way.
Yeah.
Lots of moments for you to feel heroic. Of course, one of the ways you're going to have a chance to feel like a hero is in the fighting encounters in this game. And there are quite a few. And it's handled in a pretty standard way. Basically, you're going to roll dice.
Yep.
You find an enemy on the map, you're going to click on that enemy on the screen, and you'll get some kind of narrative about what the enemy is doing. Usually it's gurgling or, something disgusting.
Yeah.
And you choose what kind of weapon you're going to attack it with. And you have these little weapon and item cards that you will gain throughout the game in front of you. And, on your weapon card, it'll say it's a heavy weapon or a bladed weapon or whatever. And these options show up on the computer screen. You select one and you just follow the instructions on the screen for how to resolve combat. It always involves rolling dice and trying to see how many successes you get based on stats that your character has. That'll determine how many dice you actually roll. And so it is basically just a roll to resolve mechanic. But I think one of the things that's interesting about this game is that for me, it actually feels less luck dependent than a game like Eldritch Horror.
Yeah, I can't really think of why that is, but I feel the same way. I feel like the tests tend to be a little bit more achievable sometimes.
Yes.
And also the way that the economy with clues, and if you don't roll a success but you roll a magnifying glass, you can burn your clues to turn that into a success, which, I mean, it doesn't guarantee that you'll be able to succeed on the test, but it gives you more options.
And what's really interesting about that system to me is that it's lifted almost entirely right out of X-Wing the Miniatures game. That's the first time I saw this system at work from Fantasy Flight. So when you fight something, you roll dice, and you'll either roll a blank side on your die, a star symbol, which is the elder sign symbol that means success in these games, or a magnifying glass. And if you roll a magnifying glass, during the course of the game, you get clue tokens. And for each magnifying glass you roll, you can spend a clue token and turn it into a success. That is exactly how combat was handled in X-Wing, the Miniatures game. And what I think makes it feel less luck dependent for me is that in Eldritch Horror, if you've ever played that game, you do get clues throughout the course of the game that will let you re-roll your dice, but you need those clues so badly to actually win the game in Eldritch Horror that you don't really want to spend it just to re-roll one of your dice. And so you never actually end up using those to re-roll your dice, or at least you rarely do.
Yeah, it's so risky.
It's so risky, and those clues are so hard fought usually. But in this game, you just get these clues during the course of the game, and that's all they're for.
Right.
I mean, they're not for solving the mystery. They're just for using it to make your die rolls better.
Right.
And when that option is taken away from you to spend clues to transform those magnifying glasses into success, because of conditions on the map or certain things, you feel that pain big time. So it makes that roll to resolve mechanic, which is one I don't typically like, feel pretty satisfying, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely works for me.
And so there is a lot of fighting in this game, and that feels good when you do have to fight. But most of the time what you're doing is actually gathering clues, you're talking to people, and you're trying to find evidence of what's happening. And so it's a good blend of those two things that really immerses you in the world. In fact, if I had to compare it to something, I would say it's a lot like playing a game like Dark Souls, right? So I love Dark Souls video games. And one of the things that I like about them is you're not given much context for what's happening. And in this game, that's true, because each scenario is kind of its own standalone story. You're just a person who has strange feelings or believes that something bad is coming and goes to investigate, right? I mean, that's pretty much it.
Right, yeah.
And it ends up becoming a compelling story, but on its own, there's not much there. The same thing is true when you play a game like Dark Souls. You just wake up one day, stand up out of a graveyard or whatever happens to be the case in the Dark Souls game, and you're in a world where things clearly used to be prosperous, and now everything is falling apart. And you, as a character, are basically taking on the role of an archaeologist, coming to this place that's doomed and fallen, and trying to figure out what happened and why things are the way they are now. And that's what this feels like to me, is you really feel like you're investigating because you're not given enough context in the beginning to have a clue what's going on.
Right, yeah. You really have no idea, and you are piecing it together as you start. I mean, as the board changes, as you discover new things. Yeah, and also I should say, whenever you find these like unique items that are pieces of clues, there is text that goes along with it that explains more information about whatever scenario you're playing.
Yeah, so the mystery does slowly reveal itself to you throughout the course of a particular scenario.
Right.
And it definitely, by the time you get to the end, this thing has really built to a major climax, I would say.
Right.
You've gotten more powerful as a character. You've gained more items and clues and information about what's happening along the way. And then at the same time, you're also getting beaten up because you're not particularly powerful. You don't feel powerful, even though you do get stronger. And by the time you reach the end of the game, you're hurting.
Yeah, and you're on the brink of going insane or just dying, you know. And the way they handle just losing sanity and health is really interesting with the card-based system, with them just being wounds, but those wounds being flipped over as cards. And there'll be a unique description of how that incapacitates you, if it's just still a standard wound or if it's something that really affects how you play your character. Yeah, it can really add up.
Oh, yeah. It feels so dynamic to me because often in dungeon crawl style games, if you get hit, you take a little wound marker.
Right.
And you put it on your character mat, and that shows me, I've been hit 5 times. You know, I have 5 more hits to go before I'm dead.
Right.
And that's definitely here. You have a basic sanity stat and a health stat. But when you get wounded in this game, you take a card. On one side of the card for wounds is a picture of a heart, right? That reminds you, this is where I've gotten beaten up. You know, it's a physical wound. But when you draw the card, unless the app specifically tells you not to do this, you draw it face up. And on the other side of the card is text that tells you, you know, hey, maybe this is just a minor injury, or maybe it's internal bleeding, right? Which causes extra terrible things to happen to you. And after you resolve these cards, sometimes they get turned face down and they just remain in your pool as normal wounds. Sometimes they stay face up and they keep debilitating you. And then sometimes the game will say, hey, take one of those cards that previously gave you extra bad things and it's face down now, and now turn it face back up.
Right.
And that old injury will come back to haunt you.
Yeah, so one of my investigators got the kleptomania sanity, or I guess like she took a sanity damage and then it got flipped up, and she was a kleptomaniac, and anytime she was in the same space as another investigator, she would steal something from them.
Oh yeah,
a random card.
We should say that's the insanity works the same way as the wounds. So your insanity cards give you extra bad things that happen to you as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you can become a kleptomaniac, as in Carter's case. Or the first time that I played this game, I noticed in the deck that if I lost all of my sanity, you have to gain an insane condition. Because in this game, you know, you can be poisoned or dazed, and you draw a condition card. So in addition to these insanity cards that will give you, you know, kleptomania or paranoia or whatever else, you might, if you lose all of your insanity, you'll go insane, draw an insanity condition card, and follow what it says on it. And in my case, it said, you're an arsonist. Felt so cold and so alone for so long, you need to seek warmth in the heat of flames. It actually changes the win conditions of the game for you. Now, you don't win by just getting out of the house like you're supposed to with all the evidence you've gathered. You win if the whole building is on fire.
Right.
Which is so thematically awesome.
Right, yeah, just your character's not going insane. It's just a generic condition, but like there's something specific to how it changes how they operate.
Yes, and it's cool enough when it's a special bit of flavor text that changes how your turn goes for the next few rounds. I mean, usually it feels bad for you because it's something that keeps you from being as good at the game or something like that. But what's really amazing to me is that sometimes it will alter your win condition for a scenario.
Right.
which totally upends how the game plays if you're playing with other people or by yourself. I really found that to be an incredibly compelling system in this game.
Yeah, it all worked really, really well.
And that system is, again, lifted straight out of X-Wing the Miniatures game.
Okay, yeah, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, when your ship takes a hit in X-Wing, if it's a normal hit, you just take a damage card face down. But if it's a critical hit, you flip one of those damage cards face up, and it gives you something extra bad that happens.
Oh, good.
So it's interesting to me that they've decided to take elements of a very different kind of game,
right,
and merge it with a standard dungeon crawl style.
Yeah, it works so well narratively.
It really does.
As far as immersion.
Yeah. It makes you feel part of this world, and like we were saying before, the narrative builds to a climax.
Right.
Where lots of monsters usually are coming out or some big event is happening, and usually by that point, you've accrued a lot of damage, you've lost a lot of sanity. If you ever lose all of your health or lose all of your sanity, then your player card flips over, and now you are either insane for the rest of the game and you have one of those conditions like, arsonist or kleptomaniac or whatever that's burdening you or changes the way you play. Or if you're wounded, now you're wounded for the rest of the game and you can only limp along one space at a time. And in many of these scenarios, you're going deeper and deeper into a building or a town, and then you need to escape at the end. And so not only is there this story that's being told through the app, but then there's an emergent story that comes about by the end. So I think about the introductory scenario of this game. It's a pretty standard thing. You're going through a house trying to disrupt a cult ritual. And that's told to you right up front, so I'm not spoiling anything there. But by the end of that scenario, I was playing an old woman named Agatha Crane and a former theater major who couldn't find work, who became a gravedigger. So at the end of that scenario, the theater guy is surrounded by cultists in the garden of this house. Everything is on fire around him. He's surrounded by flames, trying to fight off cult leaders. Meanwhile, the condition for winning the scenario is making it out of the house. So this old woman, who has formerly lost all of her health, and so now she's wounded, is limping her way along one space at a time, trying desperately to make it to the front door of this building, while the other guy tries to stay alive long enough in the flames to hold back the monsters. And she just barely makes it out the front door while being chased by some giant Cthulhu-looking star spawn.
Right.
I mean, that, folks, is as good as it gets, thematically speaking.
Yeah.
It creates such tense, exciting moments that the app knows are possible, but it goes beyond what the app is capable of generating.
Right.
And so for me, that just makes the whole experience such a memorable one. I think it's fair to say we're both really pleased with how the game plays.
Absolutely.
So it might be worth talking about replayability of the game, though, because this is a $90 game, and in my opinion, you get your money's worth, meaning that there's a lot of plastic in the box. The components are good quality, and you have to factor in that in addition to what's in the box, you're also getting a really beautifully designed, slick, atmospheric app.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't want to factor that into a component cost, but I think you have to because it's one of the most expensive parts of making this game.
Right.
But you should know going in, there are only 4 scenarios available to you when you buy this game. I've played through most of those scenarios at this point. Each one of them is very different. The introductory scenario, maybe you and I played together?
We didn't play the introductory. We played Escape from Innsmouth.
Yeah. Okay. The one that Carter and I played together was the second scenario I'd played, and it was drastically different from the first.
Right.
In terms of in-scenario objective and how everything plays out. I mean, wildly different. So you get 4 very different scenarios right out the gate. But then if you want more, you're going to have to start buying expansions. And each of these scenarios, the introductory one's going to take you about 2 hours to play. The one that we played took us about 3 hours.
Yeah, I think so.
Maybe longer. We were chatting a little bit, so It took longer than it should have. There's a third one is about that long as well. And then the 4th scenario in there is super long, like 4 to 6 hours long.
Right.
And it tells you up front how long the scenario is going to take when you're selecting which one you want to play on the app. And it also lets you save your game midway through. So That's the only way I'm ever going to be able to play a 6-hour game.
Right.
And it created a really epic feel that I was able to just put away easily and revisit. So all that is great, but it's still only 4 scenarios. And for $90, it feels like there should have been a little bit more.
Yeah, there should be a little bit more. And I mean, as far as how the scenarios play out differently, the only one that I have replayed is the Escape from Innsmouth. And there were definitely differences in how it worked out. But there was a lot of similarities. The tile layout ended up being the same. So it wasn't like I was discovering new tile. Like all of that was very familiar. And there's a lot of kind of aspects of the scenario that were similar. It was still enjoyable, and it was a very different experience than the previous time I played it. But it was still very familiar.
And see, I had a bit of a different experience. The only one that I've replayed so far was the introductory scenario. And now granted, I have one expansion for this game. I got one of the figure and tile packs that are available for it. So as I understand it right now, there's maybe 2 small box expansions for this game, 1 big box expansion, and then 2 figure packs, which basically give you all of the investigators and monsters from the original edition of Mansions of Madness and just let you use them in this second edition.
Okay,
and when you buy one of those figure packs, you get a bunch of extra monsters and investigators. So that's great. And that does introduce some replayability right there because all the investigators are very different. They have different special powers and that sort of thing. And adding more monsters into the box, in theory, lets different creatures come out at different points in the game. So you have to factor that in. I have more map tiles than are in the base game and more monsters. And so when I replayed the first scenario of the game, I got a very different tile layout. I got some different monsters and a few things like that had changed. The main story beats are the same. For me, the different clues that I needed to find, those were in different places.
Yeah.
But overall, the story plays out the same.
Right.
It's just how you get there. It changes along the way.
Yeah, I would say, as a point of comparison, if you've ever played the video game Left 4 Dead, it's it's the same map, same scenario that you're playing if you've replayed one, but the experience will be different based on some random variables and just how it happens to go. And so I would say it's still enjoyable to do. It's still going to play out differently, even though you're maybe familiar with the map and what it looks like. I don't know if I'd feel that same way after a 3rd or 4th time of playing this particular scenario.
Yeah, so there is some replayability there, but you just have to know going in that each scenario is going to feel pretty similar each time you replay it.
Right.
Now, that said, when you buy an expansion pack, I think it will unlock, anywhere from 1 to 3 new scenarios for you.
Right.
I think the Streets of Arkham expansion lets you have 3 new scenarios in addition to the new monster tile or monster figures and map tiles that you get. And so for $50, you can get an expansion that gets you 3 more scenarios and these extra things that potentially increase the replayability of other scenarios.
Right.
But there are other expansions like those map tile and figure packs that I got.
Mm-hmm.
It's $50 and it unlocks 1 new scenario in addition to getting the figures and things. So you are going to pay for these things. I will say, though, the one good thing I want to mention in addition to the expansions, I mean, you can certainly get more content by buying these expansions, but they are expensive. There are a few scenarios that I think only require the components from the base box that you can buy as DLC for this game, which I've never really seen in another board game before. So there are 2 or 3 scenarios that cost, I think, $5.
Yeah, $5, I'm pretty sure.
To download, which is, in my opinion, a really good price for a whole new scenario.
Yeah, not bad at all, especially depending upon what the length of the scenario is too, what kind of gameplay you're going to get out of it. And I can't remember, with Steam, are they allowing user-generated content?
There is not user-generated content in the Steam store, but if you go on BGG, a user has created an app that you can download called Valkyrie that essentially takes all the... Now, this is going to show my ignorance of how computer software works.
I can't wait.
Okay. I guess the source material from the main app, it uses the same UI, or at least a similar UI, and then allows you to download user-generated scenarios for Mansions of Madness that feel similar to the actual app. Like it uses visual assets from the app in this downloaded version.
Yeah.
Did that sound dumb?
No, that's good enough.
Okay, well, that's how it works. And I've not played through all those, but there are probably 4 scenarios that you can play that are user-generated there.
Right.
And they have met with varying degrees of, critical success.
Right.
But you should know that that's out there. If you go to Board Game Geek and look on the Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition forums, you can find more information about the Valkyrie app and some of the user-generated content. And one reviewer did say that one of the user-generated scenarios was amazing.
Yeah.
That it was among some of the best in the game. I've not played that yet, but that could potentially double the number of scenarios you get right away. So keep that in mind. But overall, I would say replayability is good as long as you're willing to pay. I mean, if you're willing to pay, it's great.
Right.
Out of the box, it's fine. Or if you're willing to go explore these other user-generated things, then it will go up considerably. So replayability is limited. But from my perspective, even though that's the case, I still would say this is a good deal for this game. Or at least a fair price for the game.
For me personally, I would say it's a little on the high end of fair. It's definitely not a good deal for me. But yeah, $90 is just, you get a lot. It's not unreasonable to charge, but it is still a $90 game.
It is a $90 game.
And the expansions are not cheap.
They're not. And I know that you're supposed to support your friendly local game store, and you should. And if you're ever in the Johnson City, Tennessee area, the Kingsport, Tennessee area, you should stop by Dwayne's World in Kingsport because it's an amazing store. And that's where I go to buy many of my games. But I will also say, if you can find a good deal on this online, and occasionally you can, you might be able to save, $20 on the price of this. And then suddenly it becomes a much better deal. So
yeah.
One other thing we probably ought to touch on too before we finish talking and give our final thoughts is we want to talk a little bit about the experience of using the app itself. I have a laptop with a touchscreen, and I had no problem at all using this thing. You can download it on the Steam store. Being able to have a touchscreen especially is nice because you can just very easily access the little icons and things on the screen you need to. But if you have a mouse, it's fine too.
Right.
But you can also play this on a tablet or a phone. So I played it on my laptop, but Carter, you played it on a phone, right?
Right, because I have a desktop computer and I do not have a laptop. So that meant I was using my iPhone, which is iPhone 6. It's not the giant one. But anyway, so to kind of give you an idea of the screen size I'm working with. And it wasn't bad. It's a very usable experience. The UI doesn't scale great. Some of the buttons can be very small, especially if you have big fingers or trying to do delicate little touches. Sometimes the UI could get in the way of viewing the map on the screen. Oh, and also there was at one point that I got a call on my phone and had to take it and then couldn't come back to playing the game for a little while. And the app automatically closed itself and it did not save my most recent turn stuff. And so it set me back a couple of turns, which was not fun to figure out.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
But so, I mean, it is doable on a phone, but it's, comes with, I guess, maybe a little minor headache, potentially.
Yeah, so keep that in mind. If you're able to play it on a larger screen, you definitely should.
Yes, absolutely.
But it can be done on the smaller screen.
Yes.
So I think we're ready for our final thoughts at this point.
Yeah, that sounds good.
I think as far as the good things to like about this game, I definitely want to say this is one of the most immersive game experiences I've ever had.
Yeah. Also, the app plays a little bit of ambient music, which is nice for immersion also.
Oh, for sure. I don't normally like ambient music, that sort of thing, but it works so well here and contributes so much to the mood of the game.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a really thematic, engrossing experience. And it's just beautiful to look at.
Yes.
The art on the tiles, the quality of the components, except for the monster miniatures, everything in this game looks really nice on the table, especially as the map unfolds more and more. You have a really elaborate looking structure or town that you're exploring. The whole thing feels great.
Yeah.
Also, the rules feel very simple to me. Because the app takes care of so much, you really just don't have that much to deal with.
Right. It's very minor. The app takes care of everything. The only thing it doesn't take care of is like whenever you use a spell or you have to swap it out with a different one from the deck.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And that's really the only thing I can think of off the top of my head that's kind of...
It's a little fiddly.
A little fiddly, but nothing really to complain about.
No, I would agree completely. And so we just have to say again, the app is incredibly well designed.
Yes.
The animations on this thing are super smooth. There are sound effects when you open doors, or, sometimes your character will come into a room and you're seeing the different doors that are available for you to go through. And one of them will be, you'll hear screams coming from the other side of it, or a text box will pop up saying, you hear screams coming from the other side of this door. Also, just so you know, there's a barricade in this room. So if you need to, you could barricade this door.
Right, yeah.
Or occasionally, during the Mythos phase, which is when the game fights back, the app will say, you hear a clock chime in the distance, and you can see storm clouds gathering. Nothing happens at this time.
Right.
Which is a terrible feeling, because you think, what does at this time mean?
Right. And there's no way to really replicate that kind of ominous foreshadowing with a card-driven system like the other games.
Absolutely. So the app is such an asset to this game. And it's very investigation-focused, which for me is definitely a positive.
Yes. It feels like you're actually investigating, not just collecting an ambiguous resource.
Yeah, or fighting your way through a dungeon, which I enjoy, and that has its place. But it feels fresh to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really love the wound and insanity system.
Yeah, it really, I don't know, it just makes it so much more interesting. It makes you feel like your characters are actual characters.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that, getting wound markers or insanity tokens, it is such a standard trope in video games, like having a victory point track along the outside of the board or something. That when somebody subverts that expectation that this is how this is going to work, it feels really amazing to me.
Yeah.
So really love the way that system works, especially when it changes win conditions for the game.
Yeah.
Very cool. So there are a lot of really great things to like about this game. There are a few negatives, though. For the things that I would consider bad about this game, I would definitely say the replayability is not great for this game.
Yeah.
It's fine. There is some variability in scenarios if you replay them, but for the most part, if you want more scenarios, you're going to have to pay for them.
Right. The other bad for me is just the amount of money you'll have to, I guess, invest to if you really want a bunch of different scenarios and content. It's going to be pricey.
It is. And, pricey for not a ton of replayability value.
Right.
So just keep that in mind. It is an expensive game.
Yes.
But as for me, that's all the bad stuff that I would have to say about it.
Yeah, I can't really think of anything else.
The only thing I would put in the ugly category are the monster miniatures. And again, they look fine for the most part when they're actually assembled, but assembling those monster miniatures, gluing them down onto the bases, it might not be a big deal for you, but I hated it. And I dread that part of buying new expansions for this game.
Yeah, that doesn't register for me at all. I just like minis are cool, but they're never going to be that important one way or the other.
Yeah.
So,
well, yeah, we'll take that with a grain of salt then, because I wasn't crazy about it. Overall, though, I love this game, and for solo play especially, this is a great game for solo play because you get to control two characters. And normally I'm not crazy about controlling multiple characters in a game, but there's not that much to keep up with here, or at least it doesn't feel that way to me.
Yeah, and there's no like choosing lead investigator you can use. Even when you're playing with multiple people, you choose which investigator is going to take their turn. So mechanically it works well.
I would say the only thing you gain from playing this, 2 or 3 player as opposed to playing 1 player is someone to share the experience with.
Right. It feels just as good, I feel like, with people or just by yourself.
And that's a pretty rare thing for me for a solo game, that it feels almost identical to the multiplayer experience. The only change for me is that you have to control 2 characters, which again is not bad in this game. And when that really cool stuff happens, there are moments in this game that feel like a great moment in a movie when you want to be able to turn to somebody else and say, oh my gosh, did you just see what happened?
Yeah.
If you're content with sitting in a room by yourself and knowing that a cool thing happened and having somebody in your life maybe that you can text and say, hey Carter, this building was burning down around me and it was amazing. you have to play this game also by yourself in another location sometime.
Right.
If you're cool with that,
Yeah.
then it's fine. So I think this is going to be the first game that is going to get the Solosaurus stomp of approval from us.
Yeah, for me, it's very easy to give it the stomp of approval.
Absolutely. If you bought this game right now, if you have the money for it and are willing to pay for it, this game is totally worth it just for solo play. Even if you never get to play it with another person, it's definitely worth a purchase.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and that's what makes a Solosaurus stomp of approval mean something. Thank you all very much for listening into this. We're very excited to be able to review a game that we really like because the first two were a little bit, so-so for us. But this one, definitely a great game. Pick up Mansions of Madness 2nd edition. That's all for us this episode. Thanks a lot for listening. If you haven't yet, take some time to stop by our Facebook page. You can find us at facebook.com/Solosaurus. We're also on Instagram at Solosaurus Podcast. Stop by and visit us on either of those two places. It's a great way to find out about what's going on with us or to see what games we're playing. And also, if you stop by those places right now, we're running a giveaway for our game that we reviewed last time, The Voyages of Marco Polo. So if you want a chance to win that, we're going to be giving that away in just a couple of weeks. So stop by our page and enter it there. You can also email us with any questions or comments you have at solosauruspodcast@gmail.com. And if you haven't already, stop by the iTunes store and rate us or review us on iTunes. That seems like a small thing and an annoying thing that podcasts ask you to do all the time, but it really helps us to become more visible when people search for information about solo board games. So stop by there, fill one of those out for us. We'd really appreciate it. And that's all for now. Until next time, I'm Brandon Waite.
And I'm Carter Mackey.
And this is Solosaurus.